This presentation was given to the Travis County Commissioners Court on May 24, 2011 concerning safety issues with floating habitable structures on Lake Travis in Texas. Central Texas is known as Flash Flood Alley. We are the most flash flood prone area in the U.S. and hold 6 of the 12 world records for rainfall rates in a 24-hour period or less. We lead the nation in flood-related deaths, averaging 2 times the nearest state, which is California. Texas leads the nation also in flood-related damages, sharing this distinction with Florida and Louisiana. Some 20 million of Texas's 170 million acres are flood-prone, more than any other state. And we have approximately 8 million structures in floodplains, 3 million of these with absolutely no insurance whatsoever. And we're the top, within the top 4 states for repeat flood losses to the same properties. From 1986 to 2000, Texas experienced 4,722 flash flood events. 7 out of the last 10 years, Texas has ranked number 1 or 2 in flash flood deaths, and more watches and warnings are issued in this area than anywhere else in the country. Let's look at a few facts as far as flash flood events in the Austin area. Just last year we had a big event that hit Bull Creek and washed out 2222 with 1 death. That was about 10 to 15 inches. In 2009 we had another event about 13 inches that resulted in a flood event on Lake Travis on just the northern portion of the Sandy Creek Arm. But this area's got a huge history with deaths and flash floods. We recently commemorated the Memorial Day flood, which was in 1981, where there were 13 deaths, and that was 12 inches in a 4-hour period. So we're very familiar with flash floods in the Austin area. We're going to talk about the event that occurred in 2009 on the Sandy Creek Arm, and this map will give you some key information and landmarks. The flood gauge is in the upper right-hand corner that recorded the rainfall from that event and the amount of water coming down the Sandy Creek Arm. There were a lot of docks that became mangled. You can see where the arrow points to that in the middle. And also there was a float house that is much discussed as an example of floating habitable structures that was affected, and you can see that also on the right hand side of the map. This flood event had a huge amount of water in a short period of time in the Leander area, and within 30 minutes the Sandy Creek went from 0 to 194 cubic feet per second. And then in an additional 30 minutes, it went from 133 to 326 cubic feet per second. People talk about having time for evacuation of floating habitable structures. But as you can see, this is a very, very fast-moving and quick event. Very little time would be available for evacuation. Now we're going to look at an actual video of that particular flood event. What you're looking at here are 3 docks, each usually with 2,500-pound anchors on the lake side and 2 additional cables going to shore, either wrapped around large trees or embedded in rock. The force it takes to move those docks is huge. A pontoon boat's going to appear here in a second on the left-hand side. That pontoon boat is going to crash into the dock at the shore with the green roof on the right-hand side. it gets completely decapitated and is embedded under that dock for a couple of days before it finally pops out. When it hits, the tree just below the bird feeder is going to shake and be completely uprooted. This is the end result of that flood event. There's a lot of steel there, all twisted up from the force of the debris, the docks, all crashing together and breaking loose from their cables. This is the float house on the Sandy Creek Arm, and it's used as an example of a floating habitable structure. The owner stated he used to break out in cold sweat thinking what would happen if he lost anchor, but they said it's just bulletproof. As it turns out, in 2009 it was not bulletproof. It did lose anchor. It was hit by a dock further up the cove, and it floated quite a ways out into the Sandy Creek Arm. A manufacturer of floating homes in Colorado spent from 1993 to 2005 arguing with FEMA to allow their concept to be accepted and covered under national flood insurance. Their concept was quite sophisticated and quite expensive to build, and they performed quite a bit of testing on it and provided those results to FEMA. But FEMA remained steadfastly against the concept. And on June 19, 1996, the director, James Lee Witt, released an analysis from his office. What Winston was trying to do was get FEMA just to test their structures, just test them to see if they could be approved for national flood insurance. But FEMA said it's impossible to test because of torsional forces from wind action, water surface turbidity or wave action, soaking damage that changes the dynamics of the structure, and wind loads, which can be complex and multi-directional. Also, hydrodynamic flood loads that could easily exceed velocities that were previously tested by Winston at 5 feet per second. Waterborne debris, just like what we saw with the pontoon boat or other docks, that could provide impact loads from multi-directions simultaneously. The need for human intervention and maintenance, which may not occur, and the fact that many people will choose to continue to occupy these homes during flood conditions even if they are facing mandatory evacuation. In summary, FEMA said that any technology that relies on mechanical processes cannot be equivalent to permanent elevation. Permanent elevation, by the way, is what is written in all the codes for the municipalities and the county. FEMA also stated there is an increased probability of failure inherent in all floating home concepts. And when looking at NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program, the tenants call on local governments to minimize risk of death and injury to building occupants and the public. They state point blank that this technology is not consistent with those tenants. So let's not kid ourselves. Like Travis is not Seattle, Washington. There will be flood events here that cause major damage and also could be loss of life. We should not approve floating habitable structures for our lake, Lake Travis, Texas. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and we hope it's had an impact.